These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowlandbranch.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. "He does not want this cash," the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Koch makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Kochland, by Christopher Leonard.
The Thom Hartmann Program.
It is debate night in America. Happy Wednesday. In our second hour today, former Labor Secretary Tom Perez, now chair of the Democratic National Committee, or the Democratic Party essentially, will be on the program with us. I'll be telling him about when I debated Mike Pence, and he's going to go full Lee Atwater. His staff is going to find every crazy thing or thing that can be twisted as a crazy thing that Kamala Harris has ever said in her whole entire life, and throw that at her tonight. That's what they did with me, or what he did with me. And then Dr. Jeff Masters will be here about our record-breaking hurricane season and its relationship to global warming in our third hour today. But here in our first hour, Congressman Mark Pocan is with us, as is often the case, usually the case on Wednesdays. Middays with Mark. Congressman Pocan is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the big cheese progressive in Washington, D.C. He represents the state of Wisconsin, the 2nd District of the state of Wisconsin, and the U.S. House of Representatives. His website is pocan.house.gov, P-O-C-A-N. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. And Congressman Pocan, welcome back. I'm wondering what's at the top of your mind. I'm guessing some of it has to do with, trying to get some relief to Americans who have, since the stimulus has faded out, and your thoughts on the debate.
Yeah, I mean, watching everything with the president and his 40-some tweets last night in a couple hours, it's been a lot has happened since we talked a week ago, Tom. There's no question that we need to get more aid out to people who are unemployed, to small businesses, to local and state governments. We need to get more money for testing, which is why we've put the bill now forward several times in the House. And to watch the president walk away from the negotiations and, to prove everything he said about COVID isn't true, as he and everyone who seems to know or touch him is getting sick. It's just really astounding. Like these are actions by someone who desperately wants to lose the election. I just don't know. None of this makes sense in a normal political sense. No one would be doing this kind of damage to themselves, and yet Donald Trump now is telling the American people that he's refusing to negotiate to help them unless he's elected, and I don't think that's a message that's going to work.
Yeah, for sure. By the way, I forgot to mention, you're here for the hour taking calls from our listeners. Yep. There are lines open, as they say in the radio business. The number is 202-808-9925. Trump now is behind, depending on which poll you're looking at, nationwide between 12 and 16 points. What does this say about American democracy that we're still unsure who's going to be the president?
Well, I think, for a lot of reasons, people are unsure. Two of our recent presidents were elected without a majority of votes, right? That's one thing that makes people nervous. We watched the whole hanging Chad, affair in many of our adult lifetimes, and that makes people nervous. Donald Trump is not normal, period, in pretty much any definition of normal, and that makes people nervous, and they're afraid that, he won't leave office, and we've heard that many times on your show. So I understand why people are nervous, on top of the fact that COVID is still a huge problem in this country, more than any other country almost on the planet, and, we shouldn't be in this state of affairs. So I have said for a long time, what people are looking for in my home state of Wisconsin, Tom, is to get back to normal. I desperately want to go on a Friday night for a fish fry with friends and get some lake perch and a spotted cow beer. That would be about my top thing I can think of right now, and for most people, that's what people want. And I think, that's why people are nervous, because this is anything but normal.
Yeah. What's the status of the talks? I understand that Secretary Mnuchin and Nancy Pelosi have resumed their conversations about a stimulus. Trump, took it off the table. Now he's saying, well, let's put it back on the table. I'm guessing some of this has to do with his roid rage. But what do you know about that?
Yeah, we're ready. We've been told that at any time we could come back, and we're more than ready to do that because we know we've got things that have to happen. The problem is Donald Trump cares about one thing, which is, putting his name on a letter to tell you he gave you a check. What we care about are things that help small businesses, that help people who are unemployed, that help our frontline workers, that help our state and local communities that are providing much of the testing. It's really the nuts and bolts of what has to happen. And, we're hoping that we can bring them to a place to do what any normal president would do. But as I just discussed in my definition of normal, these aren't normal times, and this isn't a normal president. So we're ready. I just don't know if they are.
Yeah. Great. Okay, well, let's pick up some phone calls here. Patty in Seattle, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I have a question about Social Security. I'm really worried about it not being there, regardless of who's in office. So I'm wondering, when you have money in the bank, it's federally insured. Why couldn't the Social Security that we accumulate through our working life be put into a bank and federally insured so that it can't be taken away?
There's a lot of things, Patty, and thank you for your question, that we could do around Social Security. I can tell you, you're not the only person worried about Social Security, even though COVID is kind of front of mind for most people. Social Security certainly is a concern. This president's actions around the payroll tax, his executive order that he tried to do, would jeopardize the very fund that already we know is going to feel some strain because of baby boomers and others. And yet that's your money, right? And why is the government messing around with your money? The good news is I think Social Security is one of those things that as long as you have Democrats in charge anywhere of any body, but hopefully multiple bodies, the only debate should be about how you strengthen Social Security. I don't think you'll ever see it cut under the Democrats because I know from where our colleagues are at, there's a bill that John Larson of Connecticut has that would expand Social Security and has well over 200 Democratic sponsors. So I know the direction we should go. Right now we tie increases to the consumer price index, which doesn't really address what seniors spend their money on. Many seniors like my mom don't drive anymore. She's 91, so gas prices don't affect her, but medicine certainly does. That's often 25% of a senior's expenses. So there's a CPI-E, and that's part of John Larson's bill, is to take that into consideration. So I would say as long as you have Democrats in charge anywhere, that's going to be a strong sign. But if we can be in charge of all three branches, I think we need to make a serious push to strengthen Social Security so that, your very concern is, you want to make sure it's there. You paid into it your whole life. It's your money. You deserve it.
John in Los Angeles, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Minute and a half to the break.
Hello. The word extortion came to mind when I heard Trump say, after the election when he wins, and that's what all criminals do, extort. This one, does he think he can win though, by default, by Supreme Court or some other machination, or some vote rigging, things like that?
John, I think the operative word you said was think. Does he think? And I think you could put a period right there, because I think many Republicans even right now are questioning his actions of the last week. This has been an awful week for him. I mean, everything he said about COVID has been proven to not be true. He's made it all about himself, not the 212,000 people that have died in the country. And again, somehow he's trying to make it all about himself. And I think people have kind of figured him out, and even the Republicans are nervous. I saw an article this morning, and more Republicans are starting to worry about a sweep across all levels of government. And that's the price you pay when you allow your political party to become a cult. So I'm not sure there is a lot of thinking going on right now with Donald Trump.
Yeah, he clearly, though, thinks that, well, he won because of a loophole last time. He lost the election by 3 million votes. He really thinks he can do it again, it seems, don't you think?
If the polls stay as strong as they are, this is going to be a moot point, because we're going to win enough states that anything he thinks is not going to be a reality. So we just need to keep the pressure on and have the highest vote turnout ever.
There you go. And it'll be a blowout. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour on Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Congressman Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing Wisconsin in the U.S. House, taking your calls right after this. And welcome back. Morris in Long Beach, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, good morning, gentlemen. Professor, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, sir.
All right. Congressman, I have a question for you. Do you believe that a scandal could possibly slow down that Supreme Court nomination? Let's say some kind of sexual scandal or whatever, any kind of scandal at all. Do you think that would slow down that Supreme Court nomination? Thank you very much, sir.
Absolutely. I think by any normal standards, we know that there's a lot of things that, aren't going to get the normal scrutiny if they really try to rush this, much less the health of senators and staff. I got a number this morning, and we're seeing a rise of Senate staff who are COVID positive now. And, they really have to take this into consideration as they move forward. But even my senator in Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, said he'll show up in a moon suit, I believe was his words. I don't think he said he was a space cadet directly, but I think that's what was the inference from many of us who heard him say that. They're desperate to get this done, but clearly they've got a lot of seats in play that they have to watch. And I think if we put pressure on those Republican senators, especially in those swing districts, we can still, that's the best play we have to stop this nomination.
Mark in Costa Mesa, California, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, hi, Congressman Pocan. I have one question, which is, why I can't understand, and from a Democrat in Congress's point of view, how is President Trump qualified to be president? I mean, it's like, he's president, but he's going up for re-election. He has like 6 things off the top of my head that disqualifies him, and we know what they are. But how do you feel about it?
You make a great point, Mark. I think many people have that question: how is he qualified? He never was ready for the office when he got elected. He's never developed the ability to be ready for the office 3 3/4 years later, and now we're paying a price, not just hundreds of thousands of lives when it comes to COVID, but many other things, from climate change to labor conditions to so many issues that are bad under this president. So I think many people do get it. That's why we're looking at the polling where it's at. But I don't want anyone to get complacent for a second. We need to make this a sprint of getting out everyone we know who will vote against Donald Trump out between now and November 3rd. Hopefully requesting early ballots where they can, in states where they can, but some states that's starting to close down. But I don't think there's a big question of whether or not he's qualified at this point. I think there's a lot of people who are just sticking with him for things that often look more like a cult than a political party.
Congressman, I've been promoting the iwillvote.com website that Tom Perez told us about a couple of weeks ago on this show. Is that, in your mind, the best way to inform your friends how to make sure that their vote is going to happen?
Yes, and I think there's even a backslash for every state, but you can go through that site to get your information for your state.
Yeah, so iwillvote.com. It's basically a portal that gives you access to the Secretary of State of every single state so that you can check your voter registration, or if you're not registered, you can register online if it's still within the window of time and all that kind of thing. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls, Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. Middays with Mark every first hour Wednesday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Tim in Blue Springs, Missouri. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. Hey, I have a question. My wife just retired from the Army nurse, at a large hospital on a base. We wanted to get our flu shots, which we get there. She got a notice that said she had 3 days to get it. It was mandatory. She went to get it on the base. They did not have it. Well, she found out that the healthcare system on the base was privatized, and it's now called the Defense Health Agency. And the people that were there are not there. That were there were active duty and civilian personnel, nurses and doctors. What's going on? We had to go to the CVS, get a paper, and take it to the base so that she wasn't suspended or penalized on duty.
Hello? That's an amazing story, Tim. The fact that under this administration you can't even get health care for our service members, that you have to go to a CVS to get your shot in order to be able to work. The only answer I can tell you, Tim, is we've been fighting this. Mark Takano is the chair of the Veterans Committee in the House and a strong progressive member of Congress. And, we want to get to the point that we're treating our veterans with the respect they deserve, and that means the health care they deserve. And the VA system has been something that, with a few exceptions, has worked extremely well for people, and we need to make sure that it works well for every single veteran. And the fact that this has happened to you, I thank you for sharing that story. And again, I think it's one more example of the scary nature of privatization as a religion, as opposed to the actual practice of providing health care to people like your wife.
Tom in Fairfax, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Congressman and Tom, I'd like to get your thoughts about what's going on in Azerbaijan.
Azerbaijan?
Yes, with regard to the fact that it's just recently broken out again, and I'm wondering how much of an effect the chaos that's going on in Washington and the disarray is prompting people like Erdogan to take advantage of the chaos and thinking that if it's likely that Trump isn't going to be in power anymore, if they need to do what they can now before somebody else will actually put a stop to what they're doing. And secondly, I'm wondering if you think this will have any effect on what China might do in Taiwan or around the world. Are people going to start taking, or are other countries going to start taking advantage of the weakness while they can? And I'd like to get your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, Tom, certainly someone could try to take advantage of it. And whether or not that's explicitly happening, I can't tell you. I haven't had an intelligence briefing to tell you that enough. I think also the fact that our Joint Chiefs right now are in quarantine certainly is another thing that provides some pause that, we are not in the strongest position that the United States should be internationally for a lot of reasons, but certainly not because of how the president's handled COVID and many of the comments that he's making right now. So, I share a concern. And I can't tell you any direct knowledge that this is happening because of that, but you're absolutely right. Countries could try to take advantage of our current situation, especially as it relates to the current situation with COVID.
Andy in Hoosick Falls, New York. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. I have a question about the stimulus bills. The first one came out, I guess, a little over $3 trillion a few months ago. And then this next one came out, looks about $1 trillion less. Can you describe to us what the differences are between those two bills that made it more acceptable to the Republican Party? And also, can you tell us what the sticking points are with the Republican Party? Because I'm only getting a lot of talking points like Nancy Pelosi is funding Planned Parenthood, talking points like that. I'd really like to know what those sticking points are on your side.
Yeah, so the bill is trimmed back largely in ways that we're acknowledging that some of the state and local funding in our first HEROES Act, I think we had 2 years worth of funding, acknowledging that we're not going to get out of this in 6 months even, that there's longer term impacts to what's happened to this country in COVID. But we scaled some of that back, knowing we have another option to do something in the next year should Joe Biden get elected. So that's probably the biggest difference, is that we scaled back a few things that we know we can still impact and not harm the public or small businesses or local units of government. And we did scale it back about $1 trillion, give or take. So we're getting closer to where the Republicans are at. But the Republicans still don't want to even consider this period. I mean, we didn't have Republican support from the Senate as we were putting this together, and now the president's walked away from negotiations, allegedly. We'll see how hard and fast that turns out to be. So it's not like, we're doing a significant number of things different other than scaling back the funds. I think we use PPP also now we've included to help small businesses in addition to the employee tax credit. There's a few other differences, but really it's probably more on the dollar figure and then trying to negotiate what the Senate actually wants. The problem is Mitch McConnell doesn't want much of anything. We've watched the entire session, so we're hoping that Secretary Mnuchin can maybe provide some answers.
Congressman, we just have 30 seconds. Are you saying that one of the ways that Nancy Pelosi is scaling back the bill to meet the Republicans' demands is instead of funding things for 2 years, funding things for 6 months or 8 months, but at the same level of funding? In other words, she's still trying to get money out to people. I saw a piece, I think it was maybe it was the Financial Times this morning, that a lot of Trump's advisors, the Stephen Moores out there, are supply-siders. They just don't believe in stimulus. They don't think stimulus works.
Yet the reserve is saying we got to do something, right? So he's getting it from different places. But that was a large part of how the dollars got trimmed in the most recent bill that we passed in Congress last week.
Okay, good to know. Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the big cheese progressive in Washington, D.C., and in Wisconsin, taking your calls for the hour on Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Congressman Pocan's website is Pocan, POCAN.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep, as in Representative, Rep Mark Pocan.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner, a memoir. This is from chapter 17, about a little more than a third of the way into the book. At first, the revolution only gave the impression of being an historical event like any other, a matter for the press that might just possibly have some effect on the public mood. The Nazis celebrate January 30th as their day of revolution. They are wrong. There was no revolution on January 30th, 1933, just a change of government. Hitler became chancellor, by no means the Führer of the Nazi regime. The cabinet contained only 2 Nazis apart from him. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Weimar Constitution. The general opinion was that it was not the Nazis who had won, but the bourgeois parties of the right, who had captured, in quotes, the Nazis and held all the key positions in the government. In constitutional terms, events had taken a much more conventional, unrevolutionary course than most of what had happened during the previous 6 months. Outwardly also, the day had no revolutionary aspects, unless one considers a Nazi torchlight procession through Wilhelmstrasse or a minor gunfight in the suburbs that night as signs of a revolution. For most of us outsiders, the experience of January 30th, 1933 was that of reading the papers and the emotions we felt while we were doing so. The morning headline was, "Hitler called to president." That produced a certain nervous, impotent irritation. Hitler had been called to the president in August and November. He had been offered the vice-chancellorship and then the chancellorship. Both times he had set impossible conditions, and both times there had been solemn declarations, "Never again." Each time, "never again" had lasted exactly 3 months. Hitler's opponents in Germany at that time suffered from a compulsive urge to offer him everything he wanted, indefatigably, and at an even cheaper price, indeed to press it upon him. It's the same now with his opponents outside Germany. Again and again, this appeasement was formally renounced, and again it gaily reappeared at the crucial moment. Just so today. Then, as now, one's only hope was Hitler's own unreasonableness. Would it not sooner or later exhaust the patience of his opponents? Then, as now, it became apparent that their patience knew no bounds. At midday, the headline said, "Hitler makes impossible demands." We nodded, half reassured. It was only too credible. It would have gone against his nature to ask for less than too much. Perhaps the cup had once more passed from us. Hitler, the last defense against Hitler. At about 5 o'clock, the evening papers arrived. Cabinet of National Unity formed Hitler Reichschancellor. I don't know what the general reaction was. For about a minute, mine was completely correct. Icy horror. Certainly this had been a possibility for a long time. You had to reckon with it. Nevertheless, it was so bizarre, so incredible to read it now in black and white. Hitler, Reichschancellor. For a moment, I physically sensed the man's odor of blood and filth, the nauseating approach of a man-eating animal, its foul, sharp claws in my face. Then I shook the sensation off, tried to smile, started to consider, and found many reasons for reassurance. That evening, I discussed the prospects of the new government with my father. We agreed it had a good chance of doing a lot of damage, but not much chance of surviving very long. A deeply reactionary government with Hitler as its mouthpiece. Apart from this, it did not really differ much from the 2 governments that had succeeded Brüning's. Even with the Nazis, it would not have a majority in the Reichstag. Of course, that could always be dissolved, but the government had a clear majority of the population against it, in particular the working class, which would probably go communist now that the Social Democrats had completely discredited themselves. One could prohibit the communists, but that would only make them more dangerous. In the meantime, the government would be likely to implement reactionary social and cultural measures with some anti-Semitic additions to please Hitler. That would not attract any of its opponents to its side. Foreign policy would probably be a matter of banging the table. There might be an attempt to rearm. That would automatically add the outside world to the 60% of the home population who were against the Hitler government. Besides, who were the people who had suddenly started voting Nazi in the last 3 years? Misguided ignoramuses, for the most part, victims of propaganda, a fluctuating mass that would fall apart at the first disappointment. No, all things considered, this government was not a cause for alarm. The only question was what would come after it. It was possible that they would drive the country to civil war. The communists were capable of going on the attack before a prohibition against them came into force. The next day, this turned out to be the general opinion of the intelligent press. It is curious how plausible an argument it is, even today, when we know what came next? How could things turn out so completely different? Perhaps it was just because we were all so certain that they could not do so and relied on that with far too much confidence. So we neglected to consider that it might, if worse came to worse, be necessary to prevent the disaster from happening. Through the whole of February 1933, everything that happened remained a matter for the press. In other words, it took place in an arena that would lose all reality for 99% of the population the moment there were no newspapers. Admittedly, enough occurred in that arena. The Reichstag was dissolved. Then, in a flagrant breach of the Constitution, Hindenburg also dissolved the Prussian regional parliament. There were fast and furious changes of personnel in the civil service. The book Defying Hitler.
On the Science Revolution this week, Donald Trump has tested positive for COVID-19. What does that mean for America? Dr. Michael Mann is here on Greenland and how it's set to lose more ice than in the past 12,000 years. This is a climate disaster. Gene Ross from National Nurses United drops by about the widespread failure to track and report data on COVID-19 deaths, testing, and infections. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear joins me from New Mexico, begetting a radioactive waste dump. And in Geeky Science, an awe walk, AWE, an awe walk may do wonders for all of us right now. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the 2nd District of the state of Wisconsin in the U.S. House. Pocan.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at Rep, as in Representative, R-E-P, Rep, Mark Pocan. David in Skagway, Alaska, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Thanks, Mark. I basically had questions about representation. I have been curious if you, Mark, believe, like how you think about representing 760,000 plus in the area you're from. I have one representative in the House, Don Young, for the whole state of Alaska. And I guess I just wonder, would some of our problems in the country maybe be fixed if we had more representation in House and the Senate for the people? So I guess I'm curious if you know about the Congressional Apportionment Amendment from 1787, and I'm curious about your thoughts on representation. So I'll just take that off the air. Thank you.
Yeah, David, I'll tell you, the last year I've heard more than probably my previous 7 in Congress, people talking about, is it time to increase the House of Representatives to a larger number so that people can get the service. Now, a lot of it depends on your member, and I can't speak for Don Young explicitly, although it does sound like Alaska is starting to look like it could be in play on the congressional seat. But it really, we have been able to respond to most of our constituents that come through in a pretty expeditious manner. I think the difficulty we've had more than anything working remotely is, IRS and some other agencies have been very difficult just because they're all working remotely. But I think it's something that is a fair question, just like looking at the Electoral College, if it still makes sense, is, would you have better constituent relations so the American people are closer to their federal government if you had more representatives? I haven't looked at it close enough to give you an assessment, but it is something that I've seen talked about more than any other year of my 8 years in Congress.
Phil in Cincinnati, Ohio, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I'm a union member from Cincinnati, Ohio, and I had a question as far as the most recent stimulus that Congress voted on. I was told it included the GROW Act, which would fundamentally change pension plans and change them to composite pension plans. And I think this may help a few plans that are in serious trouble, but it will harm more of the plans that are in good shape and that are healthy.
Yeah, Phil, so there's a lot of debate around that, and a lot of members, myself included, who are members. I'm a member of IUPAT for 30 years, the painters and allied trades, are concerned because some unions are for this and some unions aren't, and that alone, in my opinion, should be enough reason not to be pushing something forward in a bill like this. But our leadership decided that this is something that they were going to be pushing forward on pensions. I think what we were told by Speaker Pelosi was that when we did the Butch-Lewis Act, that helped some unions but not others, and that this is helping kind of the others that are out there. But from what I'm hearing from a lot of our unions that are against the GROW Act is that they're afraid this is going to put their pension plans in more jeopardy. So, Phil, I don't disagree with people who think this is probably not the best place for the GROW Act. However, the Democratic leadership in the House and the Senate disagree.
Mark, in South America, in the country of Colombia, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Right. Hi. I was wondering if the congressman had seen a photo of the debate stage setup tonight, because it is, I don't know if it's somebody's idea of the joke, but it looks like the chairs are very close together, and it looks like the plexiglass is I mean, I've seen cashiers at Walmart have a better protection than that. I'm just curious if he's seen that and he thinks it's a good idea for Kamala Harris to step on the stage with a guy who's not even out of the incubation period yet.
Yeah, Mark, I have not seen it. I did see that the vice president finally agreed to plexiglass. So you've probably got more information visually than I do on it. I retweeted today a comment about, do we even need to have any more debates face-to-face? Because I think, wasn't it Reagan and someone back 68 or something, they showed a remote debate that you had, even going back to that point, a virtual debate. That may be what we need to do for the rest of these debates, especially when, unfortunately, the White House has become a super spreading location, and the number of cases that you have coming out of there, I just don't think it's in the best interest for democracy. It shouldn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, but you can't have all of the major people who are in office or running for office getting sick. So I have not seen the setup, Mark, but I do share your concern that perhaps we should be rethinking how we're doing debates in the coming month, given our COVID numbers in the United States. And thanks for your question.
Doug, in Jefferson, Wisconsin, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thanks for taking my call, Congressman. When Mr. Trump gets defeated next election, what is the plan for changing the nuclear codes based on the fact that he's so revenge-driven?
Boy, I've never been asked that question, I'll tell you, Doug. I do think that, no matter what, we know that happens after he leaves office. I doubt that they do it after the election, so I can't speak to that. But, I'm hoping that what's going to happen, and I have to admit, I am a silver lining person by nature. I come, like you, Doug, from Wisconsin, and I think, we try to be fundamentally nice people, kind people. I'm hoping that, if he loses, others in the Republican Party realize they have to rebuild their political party to be an ideological political party and not a cult of a personality, and that there is more resistance to anything that he could possibly try to do to benefit himself or in revenge or anything else that, you're right, we could expect from Donald Trump. So I'm hoping people's better selves kind of rise to the occasion, as maybe it's even for selfish reasons, just to try to advance themselves politically. But I do think that we will have more people being sensible than maybe are being sensible right now.
Marge in La Puebla, New Mexico, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you. I'm calling regarding post office status clarification. I'm kind of confused. I understand from, I think, your program, Tom, that the post office is independently supported from the federal government. And secondly, that Congress passed a law several years ago requiring the post office to bank a huge retirement fund for future employees. And yet the president hires the postmaster general and upper-level managers. Help me.
So I think the difference here, Marge, you're very close to having it all down. I think it's the Postal Board of Governors selects the Postmaster General, but the Postal Board of Governors is selected by Donald Trump. So I think, therefore, clearly he has influence over the people he appointed, who then make the appointment of the Postmaster General. So while it's not a direct appointment of Donald Trump, it's sort of an indirect appointment, which is why we have someone who was never part of the initial search and who many have said is unqualified by his interview for the job. And also, I'm glad you brought up, and we need to say this as often as we talk about the Postal Service, which is essential to the American people, it's in our Constitution, is that almost all of the problem they're facing, other than the current COVID-related problems that everyone's facing on demand, but the financial problems they faced have become, they have to prepay 75 years into the future employee benefits. And no other federal agency, no other business prepays benefits 75 years into the future. It happened during the George W. Bush administration, and we need to get rid of that provision, and they will be much more sound, and that will benefit the public. So I just like to make sure we reinforce that point.
Margaret in Weaverville, California. You're on the air with Representative Pocan. Just a minute to the break here, Margaret. A quick one, please.
Yes. Thank you for Free Speech TV. I'm wondering, I keep hearing from Fox on the Republican side why we are packing the court, why the liberals want to pack the court. Why haven't we heard from the Democrats saying that what they're doing now is packing the court? Is what they're doing considered packing the court or not?
No, absolutely. Donald Trump is going to have more picks than any president that we've had in maybe history or for sure modern history to the Supreme Court. The problem is, after all of their rhetoric over the final year of the Obama administration not moving a name forward in the final month of a campaign to move one forward, it's certainly hypocritical, but it's also not a good idea to rush a process because whether it be right now the COVID spree that we have in the Senate or being the fact that we want to make sure we have a proper review, none of these things will serve us well by rushing a pick of a justice. We should be rushing a COVID relief package. That should be the priority of the Senate.
99% of all of Brett Kavanaugh's papers were never released. Do you expect the same here?
And if they rush this process, we could really have a serious mistake on our hands. You've got to make this thorough, given you have a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. So many reasons why what the Senate's doing is wrong.
Yeah, amen. 45 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Representative Pocan's Twitter handle is Rep Mark Pocan, and his website, pocan.house.gov. And welcome back. Kirk in Everett, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you both for what you do. Congressman, the Biden campaign has come out and said they are not going to be doing negative ads against Donald Trump. I feel that now is not the time to back off the throttle against Mussolini. He is the most dangerous president we've had in recent history, and we have to get him out of the office. Is there anything that you can do to ramp up his campaign to seriously go after him?
Boy, I wish, Kirk. But I think they said just for a certain amount of time, and I hope that time is over, because if Donald Trump is claiming he is well, we should be going back to doing what a normal campaign does. And Donald Trump never, put down his negative ads. So I hear what you're saying, and I'm quite sure they'll get back to normal very soon.
John in Eugene, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, thanks for taking my call. A question for the representative. With the Progressive Caucus in the House of Representatives being almost half of the Democratic Party, why are we not represented? Why is the Progressive Caucus not represented better in the leadership of the House of Representatives? In other words, we have Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, Jim Clyburn, all good people with good democratic principles, but I would like to see some progressive ideas in the leadership of the House. And Representative Pocan, are you going to challenge Pelosi for leadership of the House coming up in the next session. Thank you.
Yeah. So, John, I think we all share your concern. We would like to see more CPC Progressive Caucus members into leadership positions, and we have a number running for them right now. In fact, every single Democrat who's in charge of our messaging committee is a member of our Progressive Caucus, and I think we have a majority of the committee chairs are members of our caucus. So we've got good influence. I think when it comes to Speaker Pelosi, don't forget she's one of the founders of the Progressive Caucus. So in many ways, she's not a member now as being in leadership, but she was one of the founders of it. We are trying to convince and talk to members about running for leadership spots. We have a number of them doing that. We want to actually, in the next Congress, one of the things we're doing right now is having some talks and reviews about how we operate, because we would like to operate even more cohesively as a voting bloc, especially if we have a Democratic House, Senate, and President. You're going to need the Progressive Caucus members more than ever to be willing to stand up and vote against things if they're not strong enough and make sure things get better. So we're absolutely having all of those conversations. Pramila Jayapal is my co-chair. She's an amazing member of Congress. I love working with her, and our members and our exec board are all very strong on this message as well. So rest assured, we're working on some very strong strategies going into the next Congress.
Is there a specific single website for the Congressional Progressive Caucus?
There is, Tom, and in fact, sometime this month we're actually launching it in a new website because it was somehow linked off of a member's office. So there will be some kind of a push in the next, I think, like 10 days on this, and I'll make sure we share that information.
Great, yeah, because it always used to go back to Raul Grijalva.
I think it still does, and we've been working on this for about 10 months, and I was told this is the month that it officially is going live.
Great. Thank you. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. For our video this week for supporters of our program, you can find it over at thomhartmann.com. We're talking about endocrine disruptors as modulators of obesity. This is, in fact, the title of the article in Cell Endocrinology was Endocrine Disruptors as Obesogens. Why is it that almost a third of Americans are obese? And that's not true of, say, Italians. And it turns out there's actually a single measurable, definable variable. There's a category, or actually several broad categories of chemicals that are found in the American food supply in particular places, and therefore fairly easy to avoid, that actually disrupt our endocrine system, our hormone system, and cause us to crave more food, to eat more food, and also downregulate our metabolism so that we burn less energy so that food gets stored as fat. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. Al in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. How are you?
Good, Al.
The reason I called is the Republicans during the COVID crisis are playing hardball with federal funding of the states and not coming up to the plate to help them out with COVID. I mean, Governor Cuomo brought it up to the public that they're going to be hurting in the near future. On a regular basis, Congress funds states, and many of them are the red states, the poorer red states. How come that's never used as leverage?
Well, it is. They're also not funding the red states. Honestly, their message doesn't help people, human beings, because when they don't put any assistance out for COVID right now, it's just as much hurting people in many red states as it is blue states. And again, what they're saying is all rhetoric about the going to states that spend money foolishly, because this is all targeted for things like testing and for PPE and for protecting frontline workers. So their rhetoric, no surprise, isn't true, but more important, what you say really we should be emphasizing, that they're actually hurting people, their own constituents in their own states as well, in order to follow the cult leader Donald Trump.
Judith in the Villages, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, I'd like to ask him if the Democrats do win power, if they will fight for single-payer health care, because the two system of private and government does not work in Ireland, because the rich get the best care and they cut the budget for the government care. It's not working there, and it won't work here. It has to be all in, or nobody out. Otherwise, the rich will make sure they get everything, and they will still leave the poor behind regarding health care.
Yeah, Judith, I mean, many of us obviously believe in Medicare for all, right? That's our preferred way to go, and we're going to continue to advocate for that and fight for it till we have it. However, I can say Joe Biden, the two issues I think that probably would be the most significant around healthcare he's talked about. One is lowering the access to Medicare to 60, and the other is having a public option within the Affordable Care Act. So I think if we can even have progress, we're going to work on him to make him understand why the public supports Medicare for all, especially what we just went through with COVID. But I know at minimum, those are the two things I've heard him advocate for, and I think those would have popular support among the Democrats, especially if we're in charge of the House and the Senate.
Jeff in Santa Fe, New Mexico. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, good morning. I have a big picture question, Congressman. How is it possible that we have spent countless trillions of dollars on our national defense in the past 70 years, which is roughly my lifetime, and yet we now stand at the brink of collapse as a free society? That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, Jeff, I'll tell you, let me take it in a slightly different direction, but I agree with you. Bernie Sanders and myself and Barbara Lee led an amendment in the House and the Senate to cut defense spending 10%, and many would say you could cut significantly more, but we wanted to start somewhere, knowing Donald Trump is the president. You're not going to get everything that we'd like to do. For example, the overseas contingency account, that's a slush fund and gets used like that often. But there's no question that, the bang for your dollar is not there. We don't use the money to support our troops and their health care and their conditions, who are actually available for the country, but we put money into outside contractors and other things that are boondoggles that just really enrich individuals and corporations. So I think that, one of the good things that we can look at in the next year is that for the last decade we've been living under the sequester, which tied any defense spending to non-defense discretionary spending. So if you cut defense spending, you essentially cut education and healthcare, which is illogical, but it was put together before I got to Congress. That's gone starting the next year, and I think it's a real opportunity for us to talk about defense spending in a smarter way and talk about investing in things that really help people in a smarter way as well. So I think we've got some real opportunities moving forward in the next session.
1 minute till the end of the hour. Gilbert in San Antonio, you got a very quick one, please?
Yes, thank you for taking my call. And Congressman, I know you are way up there and I'm way down here, but I'd like to ask if you know anything about where the 3 new seats are going to go that's going to be reapportioned to Texas after the 2020 census.
Yeah, Gilbert, I do not yet, but your point is something that we all should be watching for around the country. I personally support independent panels. Don't let politicians pick their voters. Voters are supposed to pick their elected officials. But I don't have an answer for you, because it'll be up to the state of Texas by your population. But we should all be engaged in that fight when it happens, so you don't have the gerrymandering that occurred after 2010.
What should we be looking for as this week goes forward?
I think, first of all, Tom, I never would have predicted the last week since we met with what all happened. So I'm sure whatever I say will be wrong. However, getting relief for COVID has got to be a top priority, and focusing on the election.
There you go. Congressman Pocan, thanks again for dropping by today. It's great having you with us.
Absolutely, as always. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be right back with more of our program. And let's see here. Oh, yeah, Thom Perez is going to be with us, the chair of the DNC. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowlandbranch.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996 and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us, the former Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, the former United States Secretary of Labor, and the current chair of the DNC, Tom Perez. Democrats.org is the website. You can tweet him at Tom Perez, P-E-R-E-Z. Chairman Perez, welcome back to the program. Number one, I just wanted to tell you I have been getting so much positive feedback from listeners, both on the air and on Twitter and things like that, about iwillvote.com, this website that you guys put up that's basically a portal to all the states, Secretary of State's websites so that people can check their voter registration. And a shocking number of people discovering that they've been purged from voting rolls, particularly in Republican-run states. It's pretty alarming. But I wanted to tip my hat to you on that and just get your thoughts on tonight's Democratic debate and Trump with COVID and all the other news.
Right. Well, I really appreciate those kind words, and our team has worked really hard, and we worked very hard with the Biden team to build that website. And it is one-stop shopping. Regardless of where you're listening from today, you can go to iwillvote.com. And by the way, if you prefer to do it in Spanish, it's voyavotar.com. And you can get all the information. And the main thing I would say about it is make a plan and do it early. You mentioned people who've been purged. The main reason I keep telling people to go now is you got bad secretaries of state like Ohio, and they're a purge capital of the world, and they try to do bad things. And if you find out too late and you can't get back on the registration roll, that's a problem. So check it out early.
I'm here in Salt Lake. I'm really looking forward to the debate tonight. I want to know, this is the head of the coronavirus task force. I really want to hear from Mike Pence. How is it that you failed so miserably? How is it that we have 210,000 deaths? How is it that we still don't have a plan? How is it that 34 states have seen an increase in coronavirus cases in the last month, hospitalizations going up? How is it that you want to do away with access to health care by putting a fork in the Affordable Care Act when we're in the middle of a pandemic? And are you proud of the fact that you have a job loss record that mirrors only Herbert Hoover? Those are the things we're going to talk about tonight. He is literally the worst jobs president since Herbert Hoover.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-boggling. I debated Mike Pence back about a decade ago, and at the Heritage Foundation. It was put on by Talkers Magazine, the talk radio magazine. You know, Mike Pence used to be a right-wing talk show host. And I can tell you, the strategy that he used in his debate with me was kind of the classic Lee Atwater strategy. His staff people had obviously combed through everything I had ever said or written, because he pulled out a quote from me, an article that something that I had said in an article I wrote, at least 15 years before this debate happened. I mean, this was on a website that was so obscure. And threw that at me, and basically my answer was, yeah, I was wrong then. I've changed my mind. But I mean, this is I would bet almost anything that most of what he's going to be doing tonight is pulling out, basically the Willie Horton strategy. Pulling out things that make Kamala Harris seem extreme and trying to paint her with those things.
Right.
And I hope that she's ready for that.
Kamala Harris, one thing, I know her well. Preparation is her middle name. She is a trial lawyer at her core, and good trial lawyers understand you never walk into court unprepared. She is so prepared for this, and I hear what you're saying. I mean, Mike Pence has a different style than Donald Trump, but he has the same values, and that's the problem. And he owns the same failures of this administration. And I am very confident that Senator Harris will point that out. And we are 27 days from the most important election of our lifetime. And Mike Pence has been at the middle of some of the most colossal failures of leadership that we have seen in our lifetime.
I'd have to go back and look at the article to see which news agency is reporting this, but the headline over at this is from ProPublica. Yeah, it's ProPublica.org. The headline: Experts alarmed as DOJ issues unusual memo allowing prosecutors to take steps that could interfere with elections. Basically, Bill Barr has just said that the rule that the Department of Justice has that Jim Comey violated 4 years ago, that we basically don't go public with things that we're concerned about, which is a completely different thing from, we just nailed somebody. We don't go public with things that we're concerned about that may affect the election. We're going to blow that rule up. It seems to me like this is just made for Fox News, that he says this has to do with, postal workers or polling places and polling workers. Right. And that get ready for a barrage of innuendo and fear mongering. I mean, how do we best respond to that kind of thing if it happens?
Yeah.
It's already happening. Donald Trump himself. Oh, the election's rigged. All this kind of stuff.
Yeah. No, I mean, I worked 12 years at the Department of Justice, and we need to put the J back in DOJ. They can't win on the merits, Tom. And so they're going to continue to try to distract. And what's so important, the other thing they're going to try to do, and you mentioned it implicitly a couple minutes ago, they're going to want to try to divide us. Our unity is our greatest strength. And we are, as a party right now, more united than any time I've seen in decades. And so they're going to try to do two things. They're going to try to tear us apart. It's not working, and it's not going to work. And then secondly, they're going to try to distract. There's no doubt in my mind that they will do things, and they've already done things that are designed to get people discouraged about voting. The thing that everybody should keep in mind who's listening here is you have so much control over the next 27 days.
I'm going to guess that the majority of our listeners right now are in a state where you could vote right now if you wanted to. There's a lot of early voting in person that's about to begin, and in a couple of cases has begun. So make sure you control what you can control. We can control a lot. And not only do you control your own vote, but make sure you find 10 or 20 people. Ask yourself the question every day, what am I doing to help? We have built the most muscular voter protection infrastructure ever. And we have so many partners in the ecosystem, whether it's Eric Holder's group, Stacey Abrams' group, and everybody is working together. And what Donald Trump wants is for everybody to get into a crouch. I do a lot of Spanish language radio and television, and that's exactly what he wants the Latino community to feel, is fear. And I'm sure DOJ will be part of the fear-mongering over the next 27 days. We must bring the determination to the ballot box, and we can and will win this as long as everybody gets out there and votes. The energy and the determination is very real, and we cannot and will not allow them to distract. In 2018, it was the caravans were the distraction. Now it's again this socialism pablum, and they're going to continue to try to suppress the vote. We're not going to let it happen, and we're prepared. But again, people have control. I know everybody is nervous. Stay off the roller coaster. I see polls that look good. Yeah. I don't let that distract me from the task at hand. We are sprinting across the finish line, and every single listener today, don't let them divide us, and don't let them dissuade you about exercising your right to vote, and find 10, 20, 30 people that that are eligible and call on them every day. Did you vote? Did you check iwillvote.com to see to make sure you're still registered? Things of that nature. You have so much control. We can do this.
Yeah, we absolutely can. And Chairman Perez, you and the DNC and in general, broadly, you guys are doing such a great job. Thank you so much for dropping by, and keep up the great work, sir.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep, great talking with you. 15 minutes past the hour. iwillvote.com. Don't memorize that. Don't forget it. Memorize that website. And tell all your friends, get on social media right now and make sure that, and promote it. iwillvote.com. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with some of my thoughts on I Will Vote, and we'll be picking up your phone calls too. Stick around. And welcome back. Jordan in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Jordan, what's on your mind today? Jordan? I'm not hearing Jordan. Jordan's on line 5, Joyce. Kathy in Salisbury, Maryland. Hey, Kathy, what's on your mind today?
Thank you. I'm calling about building a hospital for coronavirus and a rehab. We could do it maybe state by state, or just our large hospitals, add a wing on for that. That would help our nurses and our doctors, because we were really depleting them. What do you think?
I think you may be onto something, Kathy. We're not really going to know what the long-term consequences of this virus are for probably a year or two. But it's looking like a shocking percentage of people who even have mild symptoms end up with what looks like is probably permanent heart damage. And and secondarily, the heart seems to have the largest concentration of these angiotensin receptors, the points of entry for this virus into human cells. But blood vessels throughout the body have them, and highly vascularized organs, organs with lots and lots of blood vessels in them, like the kidneys and the liver, appear to be particularly vulnerable to this as well. The brain. So as we learn more about it, I'm guessing that we're going to get into more and more specialized kinds of rehab. There's several websites now just for people. They refer to themselves as long haulers, people who got COVID and the symptoms literally never went away. One woman describing every day at 4 o'clock, I feel like a truck hit me, and she's like 60 days out from her quote recovery. So I think you're onto something, Kathy, and keep it up. Thanks a lot for the call, David in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, David, what's up?
Hi, I'm particularly interested in the Supreme Court battle right now. I think the Democrats can demonstrate strength, which is what they need to do, and stop the Senate from going forward on this. Apparently, the Senate needs to have a unanimous vote to call for a vote on the Supreme Court. So they could do that, and then also talk about quarantining the members that aren't.
I think it just takes a quorum.
Well, I heard it was a unanimous vote, but also there needs to be members that can vote on the Judiciary Committee to.
I think, by the way, David, before we move on, I think what you're thinking of is unanimous consent, which is when there's not a lot of people in the Senate. There could only be 3 people there, and somebody will say, I call for unanimous consent, and typically it's for things like naming post offices. And if somebody objects to unanimous consent, then the senators have to show up, and you have to have 51 of them. You have to have a quorum in order to actually have a vote. Back to you.
Well, I think currently more and more senators and more congressmen are coming down with the virus. So that could affect things too. And I think we're just at a terrible spot here. I think we need to step back and look at things objectively.
Yeah, I'm with you. David, I got to run, but thank you for the call. I'm very concerned about the Supreme Court and this appointment as well. I'm kind of generically concerned about the Supreme Court. That's why I wrote a book about it. I think it's a really big deal that people need to educate themselves about. We'll be right back, 20 minutes past the hour. On the Science Revolution this week, Donald Trump has tested positive for COVID-19. What does that mean for America? Dr. Michael Mann is here on Greenland and how it's set to lose more ice than in the past 12,000 years. This is a climate disaster. Gene Ross from National Nurses United drops by about the widespread failure to track and report data on COVID-19 deaths, testing, and infections. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear joins me from New Mexico, begetting a radioactive waste dump. And in Geeky Science, an awe walk, AWE, an awe walk may do wonders for all of us right now. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. The polls all show that Joe Biden is winning the presidential race in a landslide. I mean, he's up 16 points above Donald Trump in some polls. But Americans are still worried that Donald Trump will end up president. I mean, what does that say about our democracy? We have tolerated the fact, and our news media just kind of, this is the way it is, that the guy who lost the last election by 3 million votes sits in the White House. I mean, it's astonishing. We treat the possibility that massive voter suppression in a couple of states, you just heard Tom Perez, the chair of the DNC, talking about Ohio being, voter suppression central. Well, Ohio actually took this to the Supreme Court, and the conservatives on the Supreme Court said, "Yeah, sure, you can do caging, you can throw people off the voting rolls." I mean, we tolerate this. People being thrown off the voting rolls because they didn't return a postcard to a state or to the Republican Party. And we tolerate the Republican Party making the whole process of voting long, tortured, difficult, particularly for people paid by the hour. Right? It's because they know that that's going to be the Democratic Party's base. We tolerate the Republican Party sending armed gunmen with swastikas and Confederate flags to intimidate people at polling places. We tolerate an administration that has destroyed over 600 multi-million-dollar high-speed sorting machines so that mail-in ballots won't arrive on time to be counted. I mean, the Trump administration and the Republican Party have committed such a huge number of horrible acts. They put refugee children in cages and kept them there for years. They've minimized an infectious disease that has killed over 200,000 Americans. They've gutted funding for the environment and for workplace safety. They're destroying our national parks and selling off public land to frackers, drillers, and miners. The list goes on and on. But none of this is as destructive to this nation as ripping apart our elections. The Republicans on the Supreme Court just made it harder for mail-in ballots to be counted in South Carolina. In Texas, the governor has ordered that there can be only one single ballot drop box for a city of over 4 million people. And Trump is constantly telling us that the election is rigged and the vote can't be trusted, which is a naked attempt to demoralize voters and diminish faith in the United States of America. We live in a democratic republic, and for a democratic republic to work, for such a form of government to work, elections must be fair and accurate. And the Republican Party's Jim Crow efforts to suppress the vote in dozens of Republican-controlled states, from Florida to South Carolina to Wisconsin to Texas, are all really efforts to suppress democracy. Trump's Republican Party today is threatening the very core of American values and the American way of life, however you define that. Without a functioning democracy, nations devolve into autocracy, authoritarianism, kleptocracy, however you say that, and eventually into tyranny. I mean, we've seen this in country after country. You look around the world, you can see it happening right in front of you, as strongman dictators are rising up and taking over what were formerly democratic countries, whether it's the Philippines or India or Hungary or Poland or, fill in the blank, right? Destroying democracies. And this year, it's not just Republicans and Democrats and third-party candidates who are on the ballot. The fate and future of democracy and a Republican form of government, small r, are on the ballot as well. That's what's at stake here. So, what do we do about this? How much we vote? Go to iwillvote.com. I mean, without clean elections, without free and fair elections, there is no America. This is the core of it all. Thomas Paine, the beating heart of democracy is the vote. Deprive a man of his vote and you've deprived him of every other right, is what Thomas Paine wrote. By the way, I had a caller a week or so ago, maybe it was last Monday, who was talking about his son-in-law. He worked with the Biden campaign. And he had put up this website, keepamericagreat.com, which is, of course, Trump's slogan, but they'd never registered the domain name. And so this guy's son did it. And I said on the air, I'm not telling anybody to go check it out until I've checked it out. And then, I got busy, the show went on, and I never mentioned the fact that I had checked it out. And it is what he says it was. And it's kind of a cool website, keepamericagreat.com. So just a tip of the hat to that caller, and my apologies for the delay on that. We'll see where all this is going. But there is going to be a substantial struggle, I think, as we get closer and closer to voting day, and particularly in the weeks after voting day. The Lincoln Project just came out with an ad that was, pointing out that Donald Trump is calling out to racists and fascists and neo-Nazis to show up armed at polling places and after the election. And, this should concern all of us. At the same time that he's going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on whether there should be any relief. He's going back to his old billionaire businessman ways, right? Billionaire businessmen and women, but in particular the men, tend to get what they want by bullying. And this is what Trump did, a couple days ago when he said, there will be no COVID relief until I win. And I'm sure he's thinking, if I can just say that, people out there will go, well, we better vote for Donald Trump in order to get COVID relief. I mean, this is how this guy thinks. This is how small his mind is, how bizarre his mind is. So double check your voter registration. Go to iwillvote.com and check it out. Make sure everything's good and tell your friends. We'll be back with more of the news of the day in your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back, right after this break at the bottom of the hour. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content.
The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had masters slaves, feudalism had lords serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So what makes Trump supporters Trump supporters? Good question, right? Well, Psychology Today did a deep dive into a whole bunch of literature on this and a number of studies, and concluded that there were 5 characteristics that crossed right across virtually all Trump supporters. I do a deep dive on these on our video over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program today. But here's essentially what it says. Number 1, they are authoritarians, by and large authoritarian followers. They want a strong father figure to make them feel safe. Number 2, social dominance orientation. They believe in a caste system and they think they should be in the top caste. Number 3, prejudice. They view people of other races poorly. Number 4, intergroup contact. Most of them have never experienced significant contact with people of another race or people, deeply different than them. And number 5, relative deprivation. They feel like they've been screwed. They're not sure why. And Trump tells them, oh, it's those brown people. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. A couple of quick things here that I wanted to share with you, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. The first, Tim O'Brien tweeted this a while ago, a couple days ago, and I think it's worth remembering. This is the Herman Cain timeline. On June 24th, Herman Cain went to the Trump rally where he was exposed to the coronavirus and apparently contracted it. June 24th. About a week later, on July 2nd, he tested positive. 8 days after that, Herman said he's had some symptoms, he's had a cough, but he's improving. That was on July 10th. On July 15th, Herman Cain, speaking for his doctors, said they're very happy with the progress he's making and he feels great. That was July 15th. 12 days later, on July 27th, Herman Cain publicly announced that he's getting much better and feeling like, yeah, I can leave the hospital. 3 days after that, on July 30th, about 5 weeks after he originally attended the Trump rally, Herman Cain died. Now, I'm not wishing that on anybody, but I think that we have to keep in mind that this is a very unpredictable virus. And, so for what it's worth. The administration is figuring out new ways to punish Democratic cities or cities that, I live here in Portland and, still 40% of the vote more or less goes to Republicans. I mean, it's not like we're a Democratic city. Democrats have a majority here in Portland and a slim majority in the state. But there's lots and lots of Republicans here. But Donald Trump seems to think, and his entire administration seems to think, that cities and states are either they're either with him or they're against him. And so apparently he has directed the Environmental Protection Agency to stop funding programs that are remediating contaminated land, like Superfund sites and things like that, and that are supplementing the efforts by these cities to make sure that their water supply is safe, to stop funding Seattle, Portland, New York, and Washington, D.C., because they are, quote, anarchist cities. Talk about dividing America. I mean, this is the most politically criminal thing I've ever heard of in my life. It's mind-boggling. The last thing I wanted to share with you is about Rod Rosenstein. Apparently, the headline over on Daily Kos by Dardignan, apparently Rod Rosenstein was also a monster. And this is just extraordinary. This is from the New York Times. I'm just quoting from the New York Times. Quote, the 5 U.S. attorneys along the border with Mexico, including 3 appointed by President Trump, recoiled in May 2018 against an order to prosecute all undocumented immigrants, even if it meant separating children from their parents. They told top justice officials they were, quote, deeply concerned about the children's welfare. But the Attorney General, again, reading from the New York Times here, but the Attorney General at that time, Jeff Sessions, made it clear that what Mr. Trump wanted, according, and this is in a conference call later that afternoon, according to a 2-year inquiry by the Justice Department's Inspector General into Mr. Trump's zero tolerance policy, was family separation. Sessions said, quote, we need to take away children. Mr. Sessions, he said this to the prosecutors. One of the prosecutors, in shorthand, writing his own notes, he said, if care about kids, don't bring them in, won't give amnesty to people with kids. And then this paragraph from the New York Times. Rod J. Rosenstein, then the Deputy Attorney General, went even farther in a second call about a week later, telling the 5 prosecutors that it did not matter how young the children were. He said that government lawyers should not have refused to prosecute 2 cases simply because the children were barely more than infants. These people are monsters. I don't know how else to describe it. It's just absolutely breathtaking. Andrew in Bitely, Michigan. Hey, Andrew, what's on your mind?
Hello, Tom. Thanks for taking the call. Your screener said that I was kind of breaking up. How do you hear me?
Sounds fine.
Okay, listen. I think that Perez is overlooking something, maybe making a mistake, but I think that there should be a big emphasis on vote blue, no matter who, vote straight Democratic. Because you've got a lot of people who haven't voted in a while. You've got some people who've never voted before. You've got some people who maybe have come out of the penitentiary, maybe the first time that they're eligible to vote. I hate to see these dollars getting spoiled. And there's a great possibility if we go in voting straight Democratic, then turn around and start picking through as if we're splitting that ballot, not actually knowing how that ballot works. There's one little circle at the top of that ballot that should be circled, and that's it. You should be pushing that thought out. Circle that ballot, deposit the ballot, and go home. Or go get someone else.
What you're describing, Andrew, is called an overvote, and there were literally tens of thousands of them in Florida in the 2000 election that never got counted because they were considered overvotes. And an overvote is where somebody fills in the circle that says, vote straight Democratic. And then they go through and they also fill in the circles for all the Democrats. And if you do that, you're not being emphatic. You are ruining your vote. So please read the instructions. Andrew is absolutely right. This is important stuff. Thank you, Andrew. Bob in Cooks, Michigan. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm calling in regards to the poll watchers. I wonder how close can they be to the polls, and can they be armed? I'm just curious because in Michigan here, where I'm from, Upper Michigan that is, they showed up at our Capitol with guns and intimidation, and can they do that at the polls? That's my question.
Yeah, these things are controlled by state laws, and the subtleties or the nuances of that, whether they can be armed or not, how close to the polls they can get, whether they can have signage, all those other kinds of things, whether they can block entrances, stuff like that. That is done on a state-by-state basis. And that was the one question that when Tom Perez was on, we have a hard break at quarter after, so I couldn't extend it, and he was talking a little longer than I was hoping he'd stop so that I could say, what do you do if you go to the polling place? I mean, what number do you call, right? Who do you notify?
Absolutely.
If you go to the polling place and there's a bunch of guys with swastikas and Confederate flags and assault weapons standing out front,
right?
I'm going to find out the answer to that question, Bob, and we'll be talking about it on the air. Because this is something that Trump has openly called for. So if it's not already happening, it certainly will happen more and more as we get closer and closer to Election Day. Bob, thank you. That was an excellent one. Thank you. Norris in Candor, Louisiana. Hey, Norris, what's up?
Good afternoon, my friend. I was thinking by 2 o'clock this morning, I seen this vision in Houston, Texas, where they got one drop box, and Jared Kushner was driving a big mail truck with him in the truck. So I was sitting down this morning and listening to you talk, and I say, oh, okay, so it's clear. It's probably going to be a Trump picking up the drop box mail in the big truck.
Yeah, I don't think so, but what the game that they're playing, Norris, and spot on. I mean, your dreams are probably reflecting the dreams that many of us are having, or nightmares, if that's the correct word, which is that we're going to end up again with a guy who lost the election, this time by more than 3 million votes, or more than the half million votes that George W. Bush lost in 2000 by. Trump could lose by 6 or 8 or 10 million votes and still end up in the White House. It's happened before, and there's just this general sense of dread, I think, right across the United States, across America, that this will happen. And the way that we prevent this from happening is by overwhelming numbers. Republicans have been able to get away with this since the 1980s. Voter intimidation, voter suppression. This caused what we call red shift, where people come out of the polling places saying, yeah, I voted for Al Gore, but gee, how come, the exit polls show that Al Gore won, for example, North Carolina, but the actual return showed that Al Gore lost by 5 points. Why is that? Well, because they'd thrown so many people off the polls, and those people didn't realize that their vote would never be counted. So go to iwillvote.com and double check your voter registration. And, as Tom Perez said, voting is already happening in most parts of the United States. And so if it's happening where you live, make it happen fast. 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. Doug in Martinez, California. Hey, Doug, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Hey, Tom. It's becoming highly likely that the event where Trump got COVID-19 and all the other Republicans there was the event where they were announcing that Amy Coney Bennett was going to be their pick to be on the Supreme Court. And, of course, she was there at the event. And I found out last week that she had already had COVID-19.
Right, last June.
Could she be a typhoid Mary?
I think that's extremely unlikely, Doug, but she had all her little kids with her, and there was a piece published. I was just reading it yesterday. I forget the medical journal. It might have been one of the JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association subjournals, but it was, one of these peer-reviewed science sites where they were talking about 13 to 17-year-olds who are super spreaders. We're still learning about this virus, but it appears that the majority of people who get an infection get it from a minority of people, that there's a very small minority of people who are infected that are highly contagious, and they spread it to dozens of people. And then most people who are infected are not anywhere near as contagious, and they typically only spread it to close friends or family members. And this article was making the case that some of these super spreaders are probably totally non-symptomatic teenagers, and it's particularly problematic with teenagers and young kids because, with an adult who is going to become symptomatic, you are highly contagious in the 2 or 3 days before your symptoms show up. With a little kid, the symptoms never show up, 90% of the time, and so you may be highly contagious for weeks. So I don't think it's impossible that one of her kids did, because they were there, they were mingling, they were shaking hands with people. That's entirely possible. But I doubt that it was her, frankly.
What if it is her and they put her on the Supreme Court and she infects all the other Supreme Court justices?
Well, I guarantee you they're gonna test for that, number one, and number two, the Supreme Court right now is meeting remotely.
Think of what would happen if we were to start to ask this question, what it would do to the process of selecting her to be a Supreme Court justice. It would definitely slow it down, wouldn't it?
Well, I think what's going to slow it down is that you've got, Thom Tillis and Ron Johnson now are both testing positive, and they're both on the Judiciary Committee. And Thom Tillis, by the way, the guy that he's running against, Cal Cunningham, I think his name is, in was it North Carolina? It came out a couple days ago that his Democratic opponent had an affair a while ago, and that seemed to be tipping the race. Today it came out that Thom Tillis's wife, when she divorced him for basically cruelty. And, we don't know if it was physical abuse or what, but, she said that the cruelty was so severe that she could not live in the house with him any longer and had to have a court, break them up. Which is pretty mind-boggling, but anyhow, Thom Tillis has got his problem. But another couple. If you get, Ron Johnson says if he has to go in a moon suit, he's gonna go in. So we'll see what happens. But I'm guessing that they're gonna have their hearings and they're gonna try and they're gonna put her on the court. Unless a couple of people get really sick, it's probably gonna happen. A couple of Republicans, but we'll see. You just increasingly. In the age of Trump and COVID and billionaire-owned Republicans, anything's possible. We'll be right back. The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream. Hey, we have a new video. For our video this week for supporters of our program, you can find it over at thomhartmann.com. We're talking about endocrine disruptors as modulators of obesity. This is, in fact, the title of the article in Cell Endocrinology was Endocrine Disruptors as Obesogens. Why is it that almost a third of Americans are obese? And that's not true of, say, Italians. And it turns out there's actually a single measurable, definable variable. There's a category, or actually several broad categories of chemicals that are found in the American food supply in particular places, and therefore fairly easy to avoid, that actually disrupt our endocrine system, our hormone system, and cause us to crave more food, to eat more food, and also downregulate our metabolism so that we burn less energy so that food gets stored as fat. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Is it Stephen or Stefan in Mentor, Ohio?
Stefan.
Stefan, what's up?
Yeah. Hi, Tom. Just real quickly, I think that perhaps Kamala, if it comes to the appropriate time, if she can bring up the subject during the debate about the Russians that Bob Mueller charged criminally during the investigation, to have them extradited and face the music here in the U.S. by way of Putin. Maybe Mike Pompeo should talk to Putin and have those people brought back to the U.S. and face the charges here.
Yeah, Stefan, it's a great concept, and I think certainly she should bring it up. The fact of the matter is, though, that the reason why Ed Snowden is still able to hang out in Russia and be outside the grasp of the United States, whether you agree with what he did or not, and I think what he did was a great public service, but nonetheless, is because we have no extradition treaty with Russia, and so therefore we've got no power in that regard. But I think that your point that should be brought up is a good one. Thank you, Zach in Wayne, Pennsylvania. Hey, Zach, what's up?
Hey, Tom. To an earlier caller's point, asking what you should do if you encounter illegal poll watchers or militias at the polls. Georgetown Law just put out fact sheets for each individual state on that exact point. There's an article on CNN.
Oh, really?
Find it. Yeah, but their suggestions.
How do I find
number
that?
One, if you fear imminent violence, number one, call 911. Obviously,
right.
But other than that, to report any sort of voter disenfranchisement, any sort of fraud at polls, the hotline is 866-OUR-VOTE. That's 866-687-8683. So that's the tip line you're supposed to call if any of that kind of mishigas goes down.
Cool. That was the same number that we used 4 years ago. I remember this. Can you repeat what that number, 866-OUR-VOTE, and that works out to what?
866-687-8683.
687.
Yes,
8683. 8683, right? Okay.
Yep.
Zach, thank you for that. It is such a privilege to be here with some of the most well-informed and brightest people in the country. Brian in Anaheim, California. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hi, Tom. You mentioned before about the the tragic South Carolina Supreme Court ruling saying that now voters need to have a witness if they're going to sign absentee ballots.
Right.
And I think that's that much more important that we get on the phones and phone bank or the Democratic challenger to Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, Jamie Harrison. I've actually been doing that myself, and it is actually a lot more fun and a lot easier than I ever would have imagined. They give you a local South Carolina phone number. There's an automatic dialer, so you don't get hang-ups, you don't get voicemail, and people in South Carolina are so polite. I'm in California. I mean, I never would have imagined. They will take the time. They will talk to you. You don't get hang-ups, and it's very easy to volunteer. People just go to jamieharrison.com and click on the volunteer button. But I am so worried about the Senate, and it could easily come down to one state. South Carolina. What was it? 2006. We got the Senate by one vote. It was 51 to 49. Climate change alone. What happens if we go 2 more years with, these current environmental policies where, companies can pump as much carbon as they want into the atmosphere, and there's no tax, there's no fines or pollutions, or they're very, very minimal. I've read your book. I've seen several of your documentaries, the short documentaries that you did on this at Green World Rising. Is it possible that 2 more years unabated, isn't it possible that we could pass that tipping point and then there's no turning back from all the disasters from climate change? Is that... Yeah, this is crucial. We can't
2
mess
years,
around anymore.
it's possible, not probable, but a decade, it's probable, not possible. And I completely agree with you. So, JamieHarrison.com. Jamie Harrison, by the way, spells Jamie in an unusual way. It's Jaime. Am I remembering that correct, Brian?
Yeah, it's spelled like Jaime. If you just think Jaime Harrison, that's not how you pronounce it, but that's a good way to remember the website. And he's a great candidate. He's very progressive, and it's neck and neck. It's close, and and at the very least, we can get on the phones and tell people. There's a lot of people that probably don't watch the news that are mailing in, ballots today and tomorrow. They've already got their absentee ballot in South Carolina, and if they don't know that they need a witness, as many of them don't. So at the very least, we can get on the phones and tell them, now, make sure you get a witness, because it's going to make it a lot harder with. Yeah, it's going to make it a lot harder with that Supreme Court ruling, and this could easily come down to a few votes. Look at Florida in 2000. You mentioned that earlier. It could come down to a few hundred votes. The people, I know you have enough listeners that if enough of them get on the phone, that very well make a difference in terms of who wins this election and who takes the Senate.
There you go. Brian, thank you. And my thanks to you. Great honor to you, Brian, for doing that phone banking, collaboratively with JamieHarrison.com. Brian, thank you. We'll be back. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. We've got some fascinating science news coming up, too. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Boll and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code Tom. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich in dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Koch makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Kochland, by Christopher Leonard.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is the co-founder of the Weather Underground. Worked with the NOAA Hurricane Hunters, regular contributor to YaleClimateConnections.org, and meteorologist Dr. Jeff Masters. His Twitter handle, by the way, is Dr. Jeff Masters, Dr. Jeff Masters, spelled just like it sounds. And Dr. Masters, the go-to comment a decade ago or thereabouts when I used to have people like Mark Morano on this program and debate climate science with them was always, well, you can never say that one particular storm was caused by global warming. And every time you try to bring up anything, is that signature of global warming becoming more and more obvious in things like, Hurricane Delta and whatnot?
It sure is. We're seeing an increase in the strongest hurricanes, and we're also seeing an increase in the rates of rapid intensification. Storms like Delta, which are, going crazy. It was a 35-mile-an-hour tropical depression, and next thing you know, it was a Category 4 hurricane. Those types of intensification rates are increasing, and there is research showing that global warming has to be part of that.
So, right across the board, we're seeing global warming affecting our weather. Obviously, we're seeing, what's happening out. I'm in Portland, Oregon. What's happening in the West, with the drying out of the forests, and across the Midwest, these violent tornadoes and these derecos, is it pronounced? The lines of, multi-mile long lines of 150 mile, 130 mile an hour winds. To what extent, how do we get the media to start talking about it like this? How do we get, local weather forecast, things like that? They all want to dance around it like they're afraid of being criticized for pointing this out.
Yeah, there is a program that's designed to help TV meteorologists talk about climate change in their broadcasts. It's been going on for something like 10 years. And in fact, I went to a workshop where we brought in some top climate scientists and then a bunch of local TV meteorologists. And we went through, here's what climate change says about how it's affecting the weather. And maybe here are some ideas you can use in your broadcasts. And there's a group called Climate Central that puts out materials regularly showing for individual markets across the U.S., here's how climate change is affecting the weather right now. So a lot of people are working on this, and I think it is better than it used to be. TV meteorologists now are less skeptical than they used to be about climate change, and you do see more stuff on air about climate change in the TV weather anyway.
Yeah, it's a good step. I mean, we still have these fossil fuel billionaires funding, these climate denier groups. It's just absolutely breathtaking that is going on. Where does this go? Right? I mean, I think most people are at least semi-aware, if not fully aware, that over the last 20 years or so, our weather has changed, and we're seeing the consequences of that. How bad will it get, and how quickly will it get that bad?
It's an issue of shifting baselines. I mean, if the weather changes gradually enough, you're not realizing that it's changing, that, okay, it's bad, but it wasn't too bad 10 years. That was about the same 10 years ago. But anyways, it's going to go poorly for not just the U.S., but everywhere, because our infrastructure is designed for the climate of the 20th century. And in the 21st century, the climate's more extreme. We've heated up the oceans, we've heated up the atmosphere, and that's energy. Energy is going to create more extreme weather events and more intense extreme weather events. So things like our seawalls are going to be inadequate because there's going to be stronger storms, and they're also going to be inadequate because the sea level is rising. So our infrastructure for flooding is inadequate as well, the levees inland and flood control structures, because we're seeing more intense rainfall events. So you're going to see a lot more damage due to these kinds of effects, and there's not going to be enough money for everybody who needs it to start adapting. We've got to get on board with doing a massive overhaul of our infrastructure sooner rather than later. And in particular, I'm always campaigning against no more development on barrier islands. We should not be developing in low-lying floodplains. We should be retreating from these vulnerable areas.
Yeah. Back in the 90s, I wrote a book about the relationship between fossil fuels and climate change. It was called The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. And back then, the biggest signature that we had, the biggest indicator that we had that there was a climate crisis happening right in front of us, even though it was not in the news, was the insurance industry, specifically the reinsurance industry. These giant companies that backstop the smaller insurance companies. Swiss Re had come out in, I think it was 95, because I wrote this book in 96, or published it in 96, had come out and said, you know, we're anticipating that over the next couple of decades, we're going to see substantial risks for the insurance industry, and we need to be anticipating that right now. Is the insurance industry still playing a significant role in warning about the consequences of global warming, because it's a direct threat to that industry? And what other industries are starting to pay attention?
Yeah, certainly the insurance industry is on board. They see their bottom line being affected by climate change every year. The number of disasters is going up, and how expensive these disasters are is also increasing at a very concerning pace. So, yeah, I see people in the insurance industry all the time beating the drum on this. They're very aware of the risks. And it's starting to be the greater business community as well is starting to understand the risks as well. Because, for instance, in the real estate industry, it's happening now that properties along the coast that are low-lying are not going up in value as much as they used to, and not as much in value as the neighboring higher elevation properties. So the real estate industry is taking notice of this. And it's going to be a matter of time before some parts of the coast, there's going to be an all-out retreat where people are going to say, hey, you know, I can't pay these flood insurance premiums anymore. I'm going to move away. And it's going to be a real shock to cities that are relying on those tax incomes to help fund the infrastructure. And it's going to be difficult to sustain the city's operations when you get people leaving en masse because, you know, A, their homes are getting flooded, and B, they're deciding to get out of there because it's no longer affordable to live by the coast.
We're talking to meteorologist Dr. Jeff Masters, a regular contributor to Yale Climate Connections and the co-founder of the Weather Underground, the weather site, not the old anti-war site. Dr. Masters, in the little more than a minute that we have left, I'm wondering best practices. What are other countries doing that we are failing to do that we should be paying attention to and considering emulating?
Certainly educating the people. I mean, we have a very strong climate denial industry here in the U.S. You know, the amount of lobbying money that's spent by fossil fuel companies for Congress is just astronomical. And other countries don't have that sort of organized denier movements, and they're much more on board with, you know, doing sensible things. Certainly, we need to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. We can learn from the rest of the world. Basically, everybody but the U.S. is in that. So the sooner we get back in that agreement, the better. And, you know, we just need to both mitigate, which means, you know, reduce our emissions, and we need to adapt. We need to spend more money to defend our coasts where it makes sense to defend them against rising sea levels and not build in high-risk areas.
I saw where Venice, Italy, now is using movable seawalls to stop the flooding. Do you see that coming to American cities?
Oh, absolutely. The trouble is, in America, we react reactively rather than proactively. We're going to have to defend Houston, Tampa Bay, New York City. All those places are going to need something like Venice has.
Wow, amazing. Dr. Jeff Masters, regular contributor to YaleClimateConnections.org. His Twitter handle, Dr. Jeff Masters. Dr. Masters, thanks for dropping by. Great talking with you.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Yep, good talking with you. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 15 minutes past the hour. A bit more news and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Carolyn in West Orange, New Jersey. Hey, Carolyn, how are you today? What's on your mind?
Doing well. Thank you, Tom. How are you? I
Great.
just wanted to share a word that I learned listening to David K. Johnston, one of his talks. Might come in handy. The word is kakistocracy. Kakistocracy. Definition: government by the least suitable or competent citizens?
It's like government by the Three Stooges, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, I think we're up to about 60 stooges by now, if you count the Republicans in the Senate and then add a few more. But I heard this last year or so from David K. Johnston, and I had to write it down, Cacistocracy.
Yeah, David is a brilliant guy. He does great research. He's a regular columnist now over at rawstory.com, and I have a lot of respect for David K. Johnston.
He's wonderful. But
he really is.
I don't know a word that better describes what's going on.
Yeah, and he's also been for the better part of the last decade, I think, documenting the crimes of Donald Trump, which is some pretty impressive stuff.
Well, sure. His Pulitzer was for his writing on taxes.
Yeah. Well, that would do it.
So
thank you very much for the call. It's great to hear from you. Thank you, Carolyn. Rick in Queen Creek, Arizona. Hey, Rick. Thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hey, Tom, I want to talk about the inactive rolls and provisional ballots. In Arizona, they, last 2016, put 20% of the people on inactive rolls and attempted to hand them a provisional ballot. And until I pressed the poll worker, I would never have found out that I could re-register that day and receive a regular ballot.
Wow!
So,
how did they pull 20% of the people off the voting rolls or list them as inactive?
Well, what I was told was you didn't vote in the midterm, therefore you were inactive. Now, I doubt seriously that's a state law, but it could be. But I could tell my name ends with an R as they flipped through every page of 25 voters had at least 2 to 3 on each page. So I just did some quick math. But I wouldn't put it past some state legislatures to mail provisional ballots in the situation we're under right now. So everybody really needs to look and make certain the word provisional is not on their mail-in ballot, and understand if you go to the polls that the ballots you receive and ask the question, is this a provisional ballot?
Yeah, I am guessing that one of the reasons why Donald Trump is raging against provisional ballots, mail-in ballots, is because none of them are provisional. I would be very, very surprised if any state was mailing out provisional ballots. But that said, you just can't assume anything in America anymore when it has to do with elections and power. So good advice, Rick. Rick, thank you very much for the call. Wow. Arizona, Republican-controlled state. This is what happens in Republican-controlled states. If you live in a big city, or if you have a last name that's a common African-American, Hispanic, or Asian last name, look out. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Hey, we have a new video up for the supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. I really enjoy doing these separate from what we're doing on the air because sometimes I can say things that would be impolitic or inappropriate to say on the air. Like the name of the website that I'm talking about in this video, and I lay it out and share it with you on the video. It's ratbleepingthecourts.com, and the bleeping, of course, is a word that you just can't say on the air that starts with F. And this website is just outing these judges that Donald Trump and the Federalist Society have been sending through Mitch McConnell's Senate like a friggin' assembly line. And how unqualified they are, how hateful they are, how aggressively they've worked to screw students, to deny. Well, one of them actually said that women who are on birth control pills, that should be reason to fire people. Right? I mean, it's just insane. You can check it out over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And it's just, well, I went through this yesterday, I suppose, this whole idea that people are absolutely shocked that the Trump virus strategy is basically herd immunity. And, how could they do that? Well, this is what Republicans do when it comes to absolutely everything. Mike Pence in 2000 wrote an article saying smoking doesn't cause cancer. Why? Because Mike Pence was taking money from the tobacco industry. And because Mike Pence is a member of a political party that doesn't believe that the general welfare clause of the U.S. Constitution matters. That it's not the job of the United States government to provide for the general welfare. That's how Mike Pence views the world. That's how all the Republicans view the world. And so, if they're not going to protect us from smoking, which kills 500,000 people a year, if they're not going to protect, if they fought against seatbelt laws back in the early 70s, they've fought against car safety regulations right across the board, right up to right now. Donald Trump blowing up the car emission standards in the federal ones that Obama had put in place, and now he's going after California. The first piece of legislation that Donald Trump signed when he had a Republican Senate and a Republican House, first piece of legislation he signed allowed coal mining companies to dump more poison into our rivers. So the kids downstream are getting mercury poisoning and uranium in their water. It's literally his first act. This is how insane it is. They don't care. They don't believe that the role of government is to protect its citizens unless it's military. That's it. And they're so enthusiastic about that they will lie us into a war. We've got a couple of ISIS terrorists who are being tried in U.S. courts today. The Justice Department came out this morning and did this whole song and dance about it, and one of the federal prosecutors came out and did the boot-licking, ass-kissing thing that they do around with Donald Trump when they go around the room at the cabinet meetings. It's, as Mike Pence says, it's such an honor to be able to serve with such a noble man as Donald Trump. Well, this time it was. I just want to call out Bill Barr, because without his firm leadership, he's a strong man. He doesn't even need Viagra. He's just, he all but said that, right? This is the guy, right? It's like, this is where we're at. That the Republican Party is, back to the ISIS guys. First of all, the Republicans were saying, you'll recall, during the Obama administration, we can't try these guys in U.S. courts. They're too dangerous. We need to put them in Guantanamo. So we had George Bush and Dick Cheney, who lied us into a war in Iraq. The war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, which was unnecessary, the Taliban had offered to arrest bin Laden and turn him over to us. Bush turned that down. Those two wars created ISIS. ISIS would not have happened, in my opinion, if George W. Bush and Dick Cheney had not lied to the American people to have a war. Because, hey, the Republicans don't want to protect Americans unless it can be done with expensive guns and weapons. Unless defense contractors can make $1 trillion. And kick some of that back to them. You'll recall George Herbert Walker Bush, when he left the White House, became what? The head of the Carlyle Group. What's the Carlyle Group? An investment group that puts money into defense contractors. Now, who's the notable Carlyle Group former executive who is now in our federal government? Jerome Powell, the head of the Fed. No, he's not an economist. He's a Carlyle Group guy. It's like, so here we've got Republicans who say, yes, we've got to have expensive, so-called defense. But national defense, it only involves killing people in other countries, principally people who are not Caucasian. National defense does not mean protecting the 30 million Americans who are the 20 million Americans who have no health insurance, or the 50 or 60 million Americans who have inadequate health insurance. That's not national defense, defending people from disease. The Trump administration, it's not national defense, providing every American with a face mask, as the post office was prepared to do And the Trump administration says, oh, no, you don't. That's not our job. Our job is not defending Americans. It's not the general welfare. The only way that we defend Americans is by fighting wars that are very, very, very profitable for our big donors. Reducing drug prices so that people aren't dying because they're cutting their pills in half? Oh, that's not national security. That's not our job. Making sure that people don't get ripped off by banks? Oh, no, let's do away with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Let's just gut it. Let's defund it. Because it's not the job of government to protect citizens from being ripped off by banks like Wells Fargo that just randomly open accounts in your name. It's just nuts. Anyway, I'm going to turn this back over to you in just a second. Not turn it over, but pick up your phone calls right after the break at the bottom of the hour. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be right back.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. when a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Koch makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Kochland, by Christopher Leonard.
The hidden history of the Supreme Court tells the story of Nixon and Reagan's committing treason to steal the White House. Hey, we have a special new video up for supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. And it's about how FDR in 1944, in fact, January 44, in his State of the Union address, talked about how important it was to add rights to the Bill of Rights. The original Bill of Rights was all political rights. He said it's time to enshrine economic rights in our Constitution. I would add, like most of the governments of Europe have done. And this includes the right to housing, the right to food, the right to a good job that pays well, the right to an education, including a college education, and the right to health care. It is pretty powerful stuff. And frankly, I think that what this coronavirus crisis is proving is that we are all in this together, and that Reagan's thing about government is never going to help you was just a load of crap. And so you can check it out over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back, 35 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Some interesting speculation in an article that I was reading over on Daily Kos during the break about why Trump is getting this steroid, dexamethasone, or however it's, I don't have it in front of me, but it's something very similar to that. And and I remember reading this about this study when it came out, maybe a month or so ago, 2 months ago, was they found that using this steroid only improves morbidity and mortality. In other words, how sick you are or whether or not you're dead. It only improves those things for people who are on respirators. People who have been knocked out unconscious, put into a medically induced coma, and have a tube shoved down their throat that inflates their lungs, that breathes for them. And, a lot of folks, once they get intubated, a very, very large percentage of people die. And what they found was if they give this steroid to people when they're intubated, they're less likely to die. And that may be the body's reaction to having a tube shoved down into the lungs, right? Just the physical mechanical action is producing the body's, is increasing the inflammation at that site. That inflammation becomes more general and, it creates a disaster. But when they tried using this for people who were not intubated, there was no difference. Donald Trump is not intubated. He's not in a medically induced coma. I mean, the jokes kind of write themselves, I suppose, right there. But nonetheless, he's not intubated. He should not be, from what I'm reading on this science. Now, granted, I'm not a physician. I'm certainly not his physician. But from what I'm seeing on this, and if you are a doc and I'm wrong, let me know. But it looks to me like this is a drug. This steroid. This is a drug that should only be used for somebody who's being intubated, and to prevent them from dying as a result of that process. Which raises the question: what kind of medical care is Donald Trump getting? I mean, at one point, his doctor said to the press words to the effect of, in fact, maybe I could find the exact, here we go. Share with you the exact quote. This is a piece that Mark Sumner wrote over at Daily Kos that just is a great roundup on this topic and is speaking specifically to what I'm talking about here. This is a conversation that this is what Donald Trump said. Quote, I asked him, what do you think? He said, well, if you'd like it. I said, yeah, I'd like it. I'd like to take it. Now, keep in mind, this current Dr. Connolly, this osteopath, has replaced, Doc Ronnie. Before they called him Dr. Feelgood because he would pass out pills to you want sleeping pills? No problem. You want diet pills? Whatever it may be. People would ask for drugs and he was just handing them out like candy. But when the president of the United States, the guy who's got the nuclear code, is having roid rage, is high on steroids, that's a national security issue. Particularly when he's being given a steroid that has not shown to have any effectiveness whatsoever unless you've got a tube shoved down your trachea, down into your lungs. I don't know. I'm very concerned about this. It's anyhow. Ken in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Ken, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I want to tell you about my new radio show.
Okay.
I've gone to school on you, and the other one was, do you remember a guy named Paul Harvey?
I do. Very well.
I wound up going to Chicago and meeting him, and he told me something so fascinating. He said, your audience can see more on radio than they can on TV. And I was confused when I first heard it. But if you get into the subject, your mind will give you more pictures if you can hear a conversation about the subject. It's the most amazing
you're absolutely
theory.
right.
And
Ken, I completely agree. It's people in radio call it the theater of the mind, and I still remember when I was like 6 or 7 years old and my parents gave me a crystal radio set for Christmas, and I built this little crystal radio, and I got the cat whisker, which is actually a little piece of wire, just in the right place on the germanium crystal. Literally, it was a block of germanium crystal, and I could tune in the local radio station, and I could hear the DJs talking, and boom, it was like a whole world, and I could just imagine it. I think it's probably more true for people who are highly auditory than it is for people who are highly visual or kinesthetic, but it's a really cool thing. I'm with you. Chaz in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Chaz, what's up?
Na zdrowie, comrade, is another glorious day in Trumpistan, is it not?
It is. At least we're not dealing with forest fire smoke here, although I understand that we still have some fires here in Oregon and Washington State, and down in California they're making a comeback, which is really, really bad news. Anyhow, what's up,
Before
Chaz?
I get to the point about the debate tonight, I wondered if I could add a couple things to the list of items that the GOP has opposed throughout history. It'll blow your mind.
Sure.
Okay, Republicans have opposed women's rights in 1920, Social Security in 35, national parks, GI Bill, civil rights, Medicare, unleaded gas, financial oversight, curb ramps, eliminating CFCs, safe working conditions, and it makes you wonder what they're opposing now. The rest of the world is wondering how we get anything done.
Right. Yeah, and and generally speaking, they oppose clean air and clean water. Basically, anything that reduces the profits of right-wing billionaires, the Republicans will oppose.
Yep. Okay, so not only am I hoping Kamala is going to do this tonight, but I bet you anything she will. I bet you will build up Mike Pence and say, you know what, you're a God-fearing man, you're a person of faith, and so the notion of God is just laced throughout American government, despite the First Amendment. Now, how do you reconcile that with being the number 2 guy in the most corrupt administration, working for the most corrupt man, the most morally corrupt man in American history?
Yeah. I'm guessing that will come up, and I don't know if you've seen the new Lincoln Project ad called Adultery. But it starts out with Mike Pence back when he was a talk show host in Indiana in 1997. Video of him on the air saying, "I think adultery still matters. Don't you think the 7th Amendment still matters? Let's talk about that." And then they do this timeline of all the women that Donald Trump was having affairs with among each of his 3 wives.
So do you think that she's going to bring up the tobacco regulation like you mentioned a few minutes ago?
I hope so. I hope so.
Thanks,
yes,
Tom.
Mike Pence. Why in 2000 did you say tobacco doesn't cause cancer? Well, he's going to lie through his teeth. It's what he does, right? And he's going to act sanctimonious, and he's going to act shocked. And Mike Pence has got this Midwestern nice thing down.
Yeah,
but at his core, he's a right-wing viper.
Well, that influence had its day, but Kamala is a cross-examiner, and so I feel pretty good about tonight.
Yeah, if she can engage him, we'll see. But yeah, thank you, Chaz. Patrick in Toledo, Ohio. Hey, Patrick, what's up? No, Patrick. Okay, let's try Maria in Ontario, California. Maria, we have just a minute. You got a quick one?
Yes. We in the past have gone to other countries to supervise and secure their election process. Why cannot we request the same service through the United Nations? And if we do, how do we go about that?
The UN tried to send observers to the 2000 election, or maybe the 2004 election, or maybe both. It was one of those George Bush elections. And a number of states actually passed laws making it illegal. And so, right now, to the best of my knowledge, the United Nations is not doing anything about American elections, which is unfortunate because we have an election process that is being, as we watch, right in front of us, being corrupted by Republican Party officials, throwing people off the voting rolls, making it harder to vote, all those kind of things. But I'm with you, Maria. I think that we do need oversight. The Carter Center also does this all around the world, and they could be doing it here. But the Republican, it's like the old saying, grifter's going to grift. Republican's going to grift. Because, you look up grifter in the dictionary, and there's a picture of a Republican, like Jared Kushner's dad. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Actually, I have no idea what Kushner's dad's politics were, but Kushner's a Republican, and he's a grifter. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Jake in Seattle. Hey, Jake, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I got to tell you, when my jaw dropped, dexamethasone, My father passed away 2 years ago from glioblastoma, and part of the treatment, they put him on that steroid, dexamethasone. My dad was always a very cool, calm, and collected person, and we're very fortunate through the brain cancer. He didn't have any personality change. But when they put him on the dexamethasone, he had that roid rage, something, I'd never seen him act like that before. And he screamed and cried because we couldn't find the right water bottle for him. And that's a man who handles stress well. I mean, it was just the wrong water bottle, and he freaked out. And now we have somebody who we know is not mentally competent, or definitely not cool, calm, and collected, taking the steroid, and they have the pressures of the free world. I'm scared, Tom.
I think that once it became public knowledge that Trump was taking steroids, that the 25th Amendment should have been invoked and Mike Pence should have been put in charge of the country. As much as I, don't like Mike Pence, at least he's not high on steroids. Right. Trump, it was so obvious when Trump tweeted, "I feel like I did 20 years ago." And he tweeted that 2 hours after on this program, I told the story of back, when I had a complication from surgery and they put me on steroids for 5 days, and I came home that first day taking all 6 pills and said to Louise, "I think I just did the best television program in the world," and I was just like so grandiose and so full of myself. And then 5-6 days later, when the steroids were wearing off, I was going through, not like suicidal depression or anything like that, but just emotionally feeling like crap. And I did, and
you don't get to just quit. They have to taper you off. It's not like the president can just quit these drugs and he'll be back to normal. I mean, we're going to have to deal with this for weeks, if not longer. So, Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks, Jake. It's good to hear from you. Abdul Salam in North Las Vegas, Nevada. Hey, Abdul Salam, what's up?
Hey, thank you. Peace be upon you. The thing that I have found in my experience as a former person working in the wine industry, I retired as a fireman, but the Grifters Club in my research shows it's like advertising, the tactics and methods that are used in advertising. You think one way, but you wind up another way.
Yep. So there's ethical advertising and there's unethical. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Exactly. And this person, Trump, is using that to persuade the voters. I never voted for him. I voted for Hillary, and I found out, after the vote, I said, how did this guy get in? And that's where it is. It's in that book. The Grifters Club.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So you're right on, man. Thank you very much. I began to do some research there, but thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Abdul Salam. It's great to hear from you, and thanks for watching us there on Free Speech TV in North Las Vegas. We will be back in just a few minutes. Well, not even a few minutes. It'll be less than a minute, I think. Unless I've got to read an ad here on the commercial side. We'll be back in just a moment. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. And fair and only slightly unbalanced. We'll be right back. On the Science Revolution this week, Donald Trump has tested positive for COVID-19. What does that mean for America? Dr. Michael Mann is here on Greenland and how it's set to lose more ice than in the past 12,000 years. This is a climate disaster. Gene Ross from National Nurses United drops by about the widespread failure to track and report data on COVID-19 deaths, testing, and infections. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear joins me from New Mexico, begetting a radioactive waste dump. And in Geeky Science, an Awe Walk, AWE, an Awe Walk may do wonders for all of us right now. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. And welcome back to the last block of our show today. Elka in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Hey, Elka, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for all you do. You started out discussing POTUS treatment and mentioned dexamethasone. It is a steroid, and I think what we need to understand is that all steroids are powerful messenger molecules. So just think of birth control. That's a steroid. And you only need to take a tiny amount to change the hormonal balance. Dexamethasone is very good at stemming down inflammation. But in my opinion, and I'm a medicinal chemist, this was completely used incorrectly, because typically what happens, the body needs to fight the infection first, and then the major complications come during the second half after, let's say, the second week. Everybody's a little bit different, but it's also known as the cytokine storm. It's basically an out-of-control inflammation. It's overwhelming the body and turning the immune system against itself. And that's when you want to taper down that inflammation and use dexamethasone. If you use it too early, it will actually compromise your immune system. So I can see how probably he wanted to have everything without really listening to the experts. And I fear he's actually put himself into a more dangerous situation. So that's just what I wanted to contribute.
Let me recap what I think you're saying. You're a PhD chemist, right? You know this stuff.
I'm a PhD chemist, and I understand medicinal chemistry, yes.
Okay, so it sounds to me like what you're saying is that, first of all, the main reason why dexamethasone was successful in those clinical trials only when people were at the point of being intubated was because, not my theory that, the body was reacting to the tube being shoved down the throat, but rather because they had to be intubated because they were in the midst of that cytokine storm. In other words, the immune system had just gone absolutely nuts trying to kill the virus, and in the process it was killing the body. Do I have that right?
Yes, and I would say that it's probably also helpful before they needed to be intubated. But I haven't really looked at the papers in that much detail at the latest update for dexamethasone.
So then the corollary to that, or the therefore out of that, is that because dexamethasone reduces the body's immune response, which you have to suppress when the immune response is totally out of control, if you suppress the body's immune response early on in the course of the disease, and this would probably, I assume, apply to any disease, then you're actually helping the virus. You're making it easier for the virus to replicate because it's dealing with a suppressed immune system, which puts you at a greater risk of the virus coming roaring at you and taking you out, a week down the road. Is that a reasonable inference?
Yes, that is correct. And there are other steroids. People might be familiar with prednisone. So you have to be really careful because you become more susceptible to infections. And of course, you also had monoclonal antibodies. They used remdesivir too, but I think and nobody has ever been treated with all three of these approaches at the same time. I also am concerned that maybe these doctors didn't really have a choice because he's the commander in chief, and but I really fear that he has set himself up for an even bigger health failure in here, and. I want him to live so that there can be an election and he can be voted out of office and, prosecuted for whatever he did incorrectly. But on the other hand, if he he's really in a high risk category. But it seems he's really doubling down. He wants to, and even die as a strong man. And it was really interesting. Mary Trump was interviewed this morning, and you might remember in her book, in the family, illness was equated with weakness and was interpreted as a personal failing. And so he does not want to look ill at all. And of course, it became a production, just a show. It basically became a show of force. I'm in charge. I'm still standing, but I'm really concerned that he may, he might be in real trouble health-wise and maybe even die.
Which would be the worst thing that I think one of the worst things that could happen, because it would throw the entire election into chaos. It would throw everything into chaos. Elke, thank you for bringing some science to the conversation. I appreciate it. Kate in New York City. Hey, Kate, what's up?
Hi, I just wanted to give sort of an alternate viewpoint on the dexamethasone. I was actually on this about 3 weeks ago. I think the media is kind of overblowing this as being the reason for Trump's sort of megalomaniacal attitude that, he's better than he was 20 years ago. I think he feels that way because he beat COVID and he can use that and it makes him feel good. As far as the dexamethasone is concerned, it's actually more commonly prescribed than I think is being put out there. I was in the ER. I had a case of really bad hives and chest pain. They didn't know what it was. All these tests were run. They said apparently it's some sort of inflammation going on. They prescribed it for me, and I didn't have these delusions of grandeur. I think it is actually much more commonly prescribed than people think, and I think the media is going down.
Kate, I got to run. I'm sorry, but I got it. And thank you, Kate. Thanks for sharing your story with us. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget democracy depends on you. It's not a spectator sport. It requires participation, or it's not. That's the demo part of democracy, right? The people. That's you. So double check your voter registration at iwillvote.com and get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you. Say something nice to somebody today. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabby.com. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabby.com/Tom. Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!